Good.
Okay, welcome back to Summit Education. We started a really good, I thought, overview of S56. Thank you for that yesterday at St. James. Sort of understanding what it is, how it works, the pre-K piece. And then we ran out of time, so we thought another 15, 20 minutes on it would be helpful. So with that, we'll let you kind of take us through in a little bit more detail.
Sure. That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. I think we stopped around page 8 or page 9. Is that everyone's
That's
memory?
accurate. I have us at, well, I have us at 7.
7?
So yeah, 8. That'd be great.
Okay. So we're talking about program requirements.
Mhm.
And so perhaps the last we talked about was at the bottom of page 7. And you'll see that there's a lot of strike throughs here, right? So this is using the existing framework for the pre-K statute. So there was already a section on what it meant to pre-qualify. And we're just kind of relabeling that as program requirements. And you'll see that there are things that used to be required of a pre-K program, a pre-qualified pre-K program that are crossed out now. And then you'll see things that aren't crossed out that are current law that this draft proposes to keep. And then you'll see underlined language that's a new program requirement. So there was an accreditation requirement on page 7, excuse me, 7 line 10. There's a teacher licensing requirement on page 7, line 17. And then if we go on to, and those were current requirements. You go on page 8, there's a couple new requirements here. So one is that the program meets the criteria for, and remember, this is the public pre-kindergarten education program, meets the criteria for hours of operation and minimum number of school days pursuant to section 1071. And we talked about the fact that 1071 specifies that there are 175 days of student attendance in the school year. There are some waiver provisions that are not necessarily applicable to this conversation, but just to know that it's not a bright line there, and that was used, I think, during the pandemic. But minimum hours of operation is defined by state board rule, and the state board defines minimums, and then it's up to the school district to set the hours of operation for their schools. So for kindergarten, the minimum number of hours in the state board rule for the day to count for student attendance is 2 hours a day. That's the minimum.
2. Okay.
Yes. Or an aggregate of 10 hours over a 5-day week. And then it's up to the school district to set what the school day looks like. So this is saying that, and there'll be another requirement for the state board to amend their rules to bring in pre-K where it wasn't accounted for before. So this would be an area where there is direction later on in the bill for the State Board of Education to amend their rules to define what a minimum number of hours for a pre-K program would look like. Requirement online, new requirement, program requirement on line 5, page 8 is allowing a pre-kindergarten child to attend on a part-time basis on a schedule established by school board policy. And then there's a reference to section 563 in Title 16, which is the school board duties section. And that's just a reference to the fact that there are some procedures they have to follow when they're adopting policies. And then the last new requirement here on page 8, line 8 is the use play-based curriculum and programming. The program is required now to use play-based curriculum and programming.
What does that mean?
I think that would be a question for the field or the agency.
Yeah, we had the same question in health and welfare and realized that we need to come back and there needs to be a definition of play-based curriculum.
I mean, my kids went to a play-based preschool. You focus on learning through play as opposed to like sitting down and, doing math problems, or it's just, instead of academic focused, play focused. mean, I'm putting it simply, but that's from my experience as an educator and a parent, that's what it is in a nutshell.
And that was for pre-K for them.
Yeah,
So it's not Xbox.
not Xbox is not a part of that.
I think, is Mr. Fisher, did you want to say something?
Yeah, for the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education, the agency's director of communications and legislative affairs. I really don't want to show the water, so I apologize. But I believe the National Association for the Education of Young Children, or I'm going to mess up how to pronounce the acronym, but NIAC, accreditation, which is on line 10 of page 7. I'm 95% sure that that is play-based process. So perhaps there's a definition. I'm not 100% sure. I'm fairly certain that accreditation is focused on play-based.
Are you looking at the bill?
Mhm.
Yeah,
line
page
10,
before.
page 8.
Okay.
So it's that
Page
list.
7.
Oh, I
Page
see.
7, line 10.
Line 4.
Oh, okay.
So we noticed that when we were reviewing.
Nate, right.
That one item is by definition the other, but okay.
So
You
you
wanted
write
to spell it
that?
out.
Yeah, and we can take some testimony, more testimony, and make sure that we're not heading down some path that wouldn't work. Senator Weiss, do you have a?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
But you are correct that that term is not defined in this bill.
Thanks.
So the next subsection, page 8, line 9, is the money part, tuition, budgets, average daily membership. You'll see that that language is not underlined or there's no strike through there. So that's the current subdivision heading. And so this section sets out how school district knows they have to pay for a pre-kindergarten child, right? Because this is not a mandatory program. So if you go down to line 18, so if a district maintains a public pre-K program, the parent or guardian can enroll their child in public pre-K simply by enrolling their child in their district of residence with the school district. If a district does not maintain, we're on page 9 now, if the district does not maintain a public pre-K program, the district has to pay tuition. And they pay tuition pursuant to subsection 823A of this title, which is a reference to the town tuition program chapter. And that section is the elementary tuition section. And it basically says that if you are tuitioning a student from a public school district to a public school district, you're just paying the full tuition charged by the public elementary school. This would be paying the full tuition charged by the public pre-K program. But how does the district know to do that? So they there's a kind of a two-step process. So the district has to receive notice that the child is enrolled in a public pre-kindergarten or will be enrolled in a public pre-K program outside of the district. And then the child also has to be concurrently enrolled in their district of residence to receive that tuition payment. So it's a two-step process there. That's almost exactly what happens now.
So the tuition goes to the program?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what's happening now.
Yes, Senator.
So the parents can just go to the school they're choosing and according to the way this is written, and then they go back and tell the town, hey.
Yes, we have a spot. We are a resident here. You owe us tuition, and then the tuition's let's see. Just some conforming changes further down the page in subdivision 3, adding that this is we're referring to public pre-kindergarten education programs here, requiring school districts to put pre-K costs in their budget. Subdivision 4 is current law, and this is about average daily membership and how we're calculating per pupil spending, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So districts can include pre-K children if they're providing education for them or if they pay tuition to them in their average daily membership. And then there's a section here on the very top of page 10 that was struck because it's not applicable anymore. It was about a private provider being able to charge more than what the school district was paying for a program for, for their private program, but that's not relevant anymore because there's no private provision for public funds to go to private organizations in this bill. And then subsection E on page 10 is requiring AOE in consultation with Building Bright Futures to develop and present rules to the state board for adoption. And what is required in those rules has been amended. And if we want to jump to page 11 to what this bill proposes is required in those rules, they have to, on page 4 or line 4, they have to require the school district to provide opportunities for effective parental participation. They have to establish a process for enrollment. Jumping on page 12, line 6, the rules have to require a district to include identifiable costs in its budget and reports to the community. The rules have to require the district to report to the Agency of Education some annual expenditures to AOE. Provide an administrative process for complaints from a parent or guardian or provider to challenge the action of a school district or the state. And then on page 13, a monitoring system. So AOE has to monitor the programs, collect data on the programs, and at a minimum, that monitoring and evaluation program has to include programmatic details, including the number of children served, the number of public pre-kindergarten education programs operated, financial investment made to ensure access to quality pre-K, the quality of the public pre-K education, the results for children, including school readiness. And you'll see here that instead of proficiency in numeracy and literacy, which is current law, this bill proposes to require readiness and social, the results of school readiness and social emotional development. Documenting for progress, to use that process to help individualized instruction and improve program practice, and collect and report child progress.
Yeah, I do have a question. I'm not sure you'll be able to necessarily answer it, Beth, but it keeps coming up for me as we talk about this bill, because we're talking about programmatic details, and I'm just wondering if we have pre-K sort of pushed into the public system, will it not be sort of scrutinized in the same way that all other grade levels are scrutinized? So will it be subject to like EQS, for example, and will it have to report outcomes? And because that's not made super clear.
So there are specific requirements here for some reporting requirements. And this bill does not include any amendments to the EQS section. And without pulling it up in front of me off the top of my head, I don't know if it refers to a specific grade set or just public schools in general. So I would want to look at that. But I would say for the sake of walking through this bill, this bill lays out specific monitoring and compliance requirements for pre-K specifically.
Okay.
And I will look at the EQS statute and send an email to the group on, I just don't know off the top of my head if it says public schools or K through 12, and there needs to be an amendment there, which would be a policy decision.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's on page 14, subsection G is specifying that there's no limit or there's no prohibition on a private pre-kindergarten provider from providing private pre-kindergarten education in accordance with DCS rules. And then the whole giant chunk that is struck out on page 14, subsection H, is we touched briefly on this geographic limitations concept, where currently the law does allow school districts to limit the area their students can seek those 10 hours of pre-K, publicly funded pre-K from. And this section lays out the framework for those geographic limitations, and that is repealed. The proposal here is to repeal that. Page 16, there we're getting into some conforming amendments. So legal people, the definition here is amended to, so the definition would read, as used in this section, legal people means an individual who has attained, instead of 4 years of age on or before September 1 of the school year. However, a school district may require that students admitted to kindergarten have attained 5 years of age on or before any date between August 31st to January 1st. So it doesn't change the kindergarten cutoff conundrum.
Right.
We're just including 4-year-olds in the definition of legal people. The rest of that statute, there are a couple other sections that are amended, and that is the section included pre-kindergarten and essential early education. Essential early education is essentially special education for birth through school age. Pre-K was lumped in here, and so this is splitting them apart. So pre-K children are now up in the definition of legal people, and essential early education is its own subset, and that's an individual who is not a legal people may be enrolled in a program of essential early education offered pursuant to 2956 of this title, and that's referring to the special education chapter where early education, essential early education is referenced. And then there's just a drafting convention change in the next subdivision. Funding on page 17.
Just one quick question. You're obviously very familiar with this. Does the pre-K program become obligatory for the parents and the children, or is it an optional for the parents?
It's not. School attendance is only mandatory from ages 6 through 16 in the state, so it doesn't change that.
Thank you.
Section 6, page 17, line 3. This is an amendment to the definition section of the school funding chapter. It's the last chapter in Title 16, Chapter 133. This is the definition section for it. And so I'm making an amendment to who is included in average daily membership here, and making it clear that pre-K children in public pre-K programs are included here. And then again, you'll see at the bottom there, subdivision C, pre-K children and children receiving essential early education services were lumped together, and now we're splitting them apart. So this section would only apply to children receiving essential early education services. And then again, an amendment to the pre-kindergarten child on page 18, that definition to conform with the rest of the bill. And then a new definition of child receiving essential early education services to split them up. Section 7, page 19, this is the weighting statute. So you'll see on line 17 on page 19, pre-kindergarten children in current law receive a weight of -0.54 for determining weighted long-term membership. You'll see that the next section there is grades 6 through 8, right? What happened to kindergarten through grades 5? Well, they have a weight of 1, so they're not listed. So by repealing the pre-kindergarten weight, you're automatically lumping them into the elementary school weight. And then there are two conforming amendments on page 20 that are outside of my area of expertise related to transportation and schools. So just making sure that pre-kindergarten programs are included in school zones and state speed zones. And then page 21, section 10 is the creation of the second deputy secretary position. and an appropriation for funding that position. And you'll see that that's authorized to begin in fiscal year 2024. And then section 11 is some rulemaking directives. So it starts with the DCF rulemaking requirements in subsection A, and we're going to skip those and go to subsection B on page 22. And so because of the changes that this bill proposes to make to the pre-K provision of pre-kindergarten in the state, the agency is directed to consult with Building Bright Futures and amends the following rules to incorporate the new changes to the public pre-kindergarten education program. So we talked about the length of the school day rule, the rule regarding full-time equivalent enrollment of pupils, and then the pre-kindergarten education rules themselves. And then there are, I didn't draft this. Abby Shepherd, who handles all of the tax matters in my office, drafted the sections related to property tax. And I just wanted to flag those because they do come before the DCF section of the bill. And if you want to walk through those, I would recommend Abby to come in. But that's the pre-K section, the public pre-kindergarten education program section.
So again, it looks like we've got two paths that a separate bill will end up in this committee, which will look like this, basically these sections, I think, with a sponsor or multiple sponsors. And so health and welfare sounds like we'll work on this stuff, the early childhood stuff. We'll probably get a bill in here. Beyond the wall, we'll start to do a little testimony, not expected to take it up really seriously this year, but more get ready to take it up, I think, in next year. That being said, there may be questions that come up over the next several weeks that we would want answers to during the summer. So we might put together some kind of study program. What is the universal pre-K? What would it cost? I'm putting down, what would the economic impacts on the independent providers be? When should the deputy secretary be put, those kinds of things we might want to work on or have a study committee work on over the summer.
So the thing that I'm kind of stuck on at the moment is, we've heard some testimony that's, generally in opposition to universal pre-K at the risk of jeopardizing private providers. I've also heard that recently from some constituents. And then there's the fact that it's not included at all in the RAND report. It just feels really counterintuitive that we now have this big thing in front of us that's not in the report, doesn't seem to have much support from providers. And I mean, I also recognize that there's always two or more sides to a story. So I'd like to hear from proponents and supporters of this who can also address some of the concerns that we've been hearing.
Yeah, so the answer is yeah, absolutely. But just so you know, we wouldn't, because of timing and like you said, we're hearing more about the independent providers and giving people access 0 to 4 and 0 to 5. This is something if we do decide to take it up, we would take it up next year. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, though, we can hear from some of the pro people over the next couple of weeks saying, hey, this is why you guys should do it next year. But there's no expectation from the corner office, in fact, no direction, I should say, from the corner office, Pro Tem's office, that we would be able to get to that, to passing a pre-K bill this year. Thus, that's why it sounds like it's going to be split off, that we will pass some kind of
the other part of it,
but we won't do that because that's not our jurisdiction.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any questions from the St. James? Okay.
Thank you.
Take 5 minutes and we'll come back and we will hear from our two witnesses